Hello and welcome. Welcome to our next in the Hydrocolloids series by IMR. Today we'll be covering Tara gum. I'll be presenting a little overview on the commercial aspects of Tara gum, market size, major suppliers, raw material situation, pricing, followed by a more scientific and technical presentation on Tara gum. And then last but by no means least, Nisha Zalesny will be presenting on some of the formulations and applications in which Tara gum is used. For those of you that are not familiar with IMR or have not seen one of our previous hydrocolloid videos, I want to make something very clear. We at IMR don't buy, don't sell, don't represent, don't distribute for any single hydrocolloid or hydrocolloid producer. This is how we assure the fact that we are neutral and objective in reporting how we see things in the world of hydrocolloids. Again, we have no commercial activity in hydrocolloids other than in these videos and the many reports that we produce on the world of hydrocolloids. Now let's look a little bit at the market size for Tara gum in the world of all the hydrocolloids. So overall, I should tell you, the global market for all hydrocolloids is very, very large. 2.4 million tons of hydrocolloids, valued at about $6.7 billion. Now, as you can see on the chart that's being presented, Tara gum accounts for no more than about 3,000 tons and $14 million, which really is minuscule in the grand scheme of hydrocolloid things. 0.1% of the volume and 0.2% of the total value. Well, if we remove the big giants in the world of hydrocolloids, if we remove starches and gelatin, which by the way account for about 80% of the total volume of hydrocolloids, but only about 50% of the total value, well then, as you can see on this chart, Tara gum makes a leap from 0.1% of the total tonnage to 0.6%, and all the way up to 0.3% of the total value. So it remains relatively small. Tara gum may be small, however, it's critical to those that are using it and to those that have become familiar with it. So not to be to underestimate the value of Tara gum as one of the tools in a portfolio of a hydrocolloid user. Definitely has its position and is here to stay. As far as the origins of Tara gum, there's something unique about Tara gum. There's only one country in the whole world that produces all the raw material that's used to produce all the Tara gum in the world, and that country is Peru. There have been attempts to grow the Tara tree in neighboring countries, but none of them has succeeded really on a commercial basis, and if you ever see Tara gum declared on a food label, you can be pretty sure that it comes from Peru. The raw material does, at least. Peru has made very strong efforts to maintain that unique position, and it will not allow commercial volumes of seeds to be exported from Peru unless they have been irradiated. So, in essence, there is no export of seeds outside of Peru for the production of Tara gum. The only exports that are conducted are for the splits, which obviously cannot be used to grow Tara trees outside of Peru. Now, within Peru itself, the source of raw material used to be on a purely wild harvest of the Tara pod. The tree itself grew in a very specific area of the Andes, at a certain elevation above which it couldn't grow and below which it wasn't growing very well. That has changed over the last few decades, and there is now a significant and growing volume of Tara trees that are farmed, and the farmed source of raw material has become quite significant and is likely to continue to become more important in the supply of raw material for Tara gum. Talking of the supply of Tara gum, let's talk a little bit about the suppliers themselves. Peru has some very accurate export statistics, and we present them here in this chart where you can see that really 4 big producers of tarragum within Peru account for 98% of the total volume exported. This data is for 2019. The data for 2020 has not yet been fully published, but likely to remain more or less in this order. The biggest producer by far is Exandal, followed by Silva Team. Molinos ranks third, and then Foreign Domestic Chemical ranks fourth. But between these top four players, 98%. The other 2% is supplied by a number of small up-and-coming producers of tarragum, but as of yet, pretty insignificant. There are two producers of tarragum outside of Peru that we know of, at least, both in Switzerland, Polygal and Unipectin, both producing from splits that have been exported from Peru. And in the case of Polygal, the production facility is actually in Spain and not in Switzerland. Let's talk a little bit about the price of tarragum. As you can see from the chart we're presenting here, the price of tarragum is pretty cyclic, and the main reason for that is because it's a natural product, and the production and yield of the tara crop is dependent on weather conditions, and so it can range from under $2 a pound to close to $5 a pound, so quite cyclic. There's another factor, however, which affects the price of tarragum, and that is one of the other galactomannanes that it competes with, and that is locust bean gum. And if we look at the price chart for locust bean gum, we can see that it also is quite volatile and fluctuates quite significantly, also related to weather conditions. And so the cyclic nature of tarragum is one of the problems that has to be addressed by the producers, and one that is being addressed with increased farming and increased availability of a crop and raw material. But nevertheless, the cyclic nature of tarragum is one of the aspects that has to be considered for those that are using it. And finally, if we do a little bit of crystal ball gazing for hydrocolloids in general, tarragum in particular, we estimate that the growth rate of tarragum is a little bit above average at about 3.5% per year, which over the next 5 years, if we apply that growth rate, the 3,000 tons and $14 million value, will grow to about 3,600 tons and about $16 million in value by 2025. Now, we should mention that, first of all, this forecast is made on a constant price, and then most important, that the price we've used is more of an average over several years rather than the current pretty unusual and pretty high price of tarragum, which, as we mentioned, is related to the unusual and high price of locust bean gum. So this is more of a general and traditional kind of expectation for the tara market. And then for the other hydrocolloids, we can see that we expect them to grow a little bit lower on an average rate. Within those, however, some of them will be growing faster than 3.5%, some will be growing lower, but overall, tarragum will be growing a little bit faster than the average for all the other hydrocolloids. And then it should still be noted, even at this growth rate, tarragum will remain a small niche market for the hydrocolloid user. However, a very important one, and one that users have come to rely on. So good solid future for tarragum. And now let me pass it on to Ross for a more technical and scientific look at tarragum. Over to you, Ross.
Thanks for that introduction, Dennis. I'm glad to be able to be here today and talk to you about an interesting gum, tarragum. Tara is a galactomannan polymer, and in order to understand its place amongst these different polymers, we're going to first explain the family that it belongs to. And that's the family of galactomannan polymers. They're called galactomannan polymers because they all share the same backbone, which is beta-1,4 linked mannose. Beta-1,4 linked mannose, much like beta-1,4 linked glucose, which is cellulose, that beta-1,4 linked mannose is not soluble. These polymers become water-soluble as galactose groups are added to that backbone. Nature does that for us and provides a whole series of these galactomannan polymers. And they range from ones that are very soluble, such as fenugreek, which has a hydration temperature somewhat below room temperature and has a M to G ratio of 1.2, all the way to locust bean gum, which has an M to G ratio of 3.7 and requires considerable heat in order to get it into solution. As you see from the table, the guar gum and locust bean gum are on either side of Terra. And as Nish is going to explain in some of the applications, that means that the Terra gum can act as a replacement or an alternative for either of these two gums with certain modifications made to the formulation. Terra gum, which is also known by those countries using the E-numbering system as E417, is cultivated almost exclusively in Peru. That makes it a fairly unique gum in and of itself. Now, like most of the galactomannan polymers, this is a seed, and that seed, in the case of Terra, has a husk on the outside of it that really has to be roasted in order to break that husk or hull. Once it's been roasted, then the endosperm can be removed, separated from the germ, and the resulting material is wet milled to produce the Terra gum that you see. Again, that process is a little different if you were making locust bean or guar, because they don't require this roasting step and they're not usually wet milled. How do you judge the quality of Terra gum? Well, it's like a lot of these other similar polymers in that you judge it by the viscosity it makes. Usually it's only in one grade, but there can be up to 3 grades available from certain manufacturers. There are organically grown grades if that's important for your product development. But the powder color is something that's important. The lighter, the whiter it is, the more premium, the more high quality the product is. And then, of course, we have to worry about bacterial counts because we don't want to contaminate the food that we're adding this to. So those factors of the viscosity, whether or not it's organic, what the powder color is, and thus the solution color, and also the freedom from or lack of contaminants, bacterial contaminants, those things all go in to make up the quality of Terra gum. Blocky structure is a feature of the galactomannan polymers that helps make them different from one another. And that means that the galactose substitution on the mannose backbone is not uniform. Some parts of the molecule end up with relatively long areas of mannose with no galactose on them, where other areas are richly substituted in galactose. And it's those regions that are richly substituted that help convey the solubility to the polymer. On the other hand, those areas where there's very little or no galactose and the mannose backbone is the feature being presented to solution, those mannose-rich areas, those end up having effects for synergism, ice crystal inhibition, and other important properties of the galactomannans. For example, the synergism with xanthan gum is strongest with locust bean gum, where we have the lowest amount of galactose present. And in that case, we actually form a gel so stiff that at 1%, you could hold it in your hand. It's a very rubbery gel. With guar at that same concentration, you end up with a synergistic solution. That is, it has more viscosity in either the xanthan or the guar itself, but it is still a flowable liquid. Terra gum is intermediate between those two properties, and it forms a semi-gel structure under those same sort of conditions. Those mannose backbone areas that are not substituted are also thought to be extremely important in preventing ice crystals. It's been empirically observed, although not technically as well understood as we need, that those regions interfere with the crystallization of water and thus minimize the size of ice crystals in frozen dairy products. And for that reason, locust bean has always been preferred as an excellent dairy stabilizer, especially in frozen desserts. The guar is not thought to be as effective because of not having as many areas of the mannose that are unsubstituted. They've got the galactose on them. The tarragon is intermediate and therefore is a very good stabilizer and does help prevent ice crystal growth and thus can present in certain applications quite a viable alternative to the use of locust bean gum. So let's summarize the useful properties of tarragon. One of those that we haven't talked about up to this point is the fact that it's more stable in moderately acidic systems than is guar gum. And that's thought to be because of this slightly lower degree of solubility. The more soluble a polymer is, oftentimes the more subject it is to being degraded by acid. That's certainly true of the galactomannan family. Because of the hydration properties of tarragon, it's actually easier to disperse in cold water. It's not so fully soluble as guar would be, and that makes it easier to disperse. That is, it doesn't tend to form lumps quite as easily. But at the same time, it does have to be heated. It doesn't have to be heated as much as locust bean, which has to be heated to quite a high temperature. So you're sort of got this balance between easy to disperse, less tendency to lump than guar, but at the same time doesn't require as much heat as locust bean to fully solubilize. Tarragon also seems to have reduced taste and odor problems, especially compared to guar, which sometimes can be quite beany. And this is thought to come about because of that toasting step, roasting that we had to do to remove that hull or husk off of that tough seed. It's also thought that that could come from the wet milling, and probably also in the manufacturing, they're taking more pains. Tarragon right now is kind of a specialty gum, and it's not churned out in the huge quantities that a polymer like guar is. So it has some manufacturing steps, and probably the manufacturers are taking more care. So in general, you have fewer taste and odor problems than you might have with other galactomannans, especially the guar gum. That purity also comes into play with finding less protein and other contaminants in the terra. Again, because of this manufacturing process and the care that's taken, it's usually a more pure polymer than something like guar is. So in summary, tarragon is quite an interesting and useful gum. You can try it as an alternative to things like locust bean gum, where it is going to provide some protection for ice crystal growth and make for a good dairy stabilizer. And you can even use it in carrageenan and xanthan applications when you need some synergism. It may be a relatively new polymer in the galactomannan family, although it's been around for a while, but I think it's one that if you try it, you're going to find that it is beneficial in many applications. If you've got any questions, please contact us and we'll try to answer those questions. Now, Nisha is going to tell you about some of the applications and some of her work with tarragon.
Thank you, Dennis and Ross. We are going to move on to the applications. And hopefully in this section of the video, we'll be able to take and integrate what Dennis has talked about with what Ross has talked about and apply it into some of the commercial successes for TerraGum. So one of the primary successes for TerraGum so far has been in ice cream. And I know this is a lot of folks' favorite application area, and it's certainly one of mine. I'm going to put up a couple of examples here. This first example is Marionberry ice cream from Tillamook. They are based out of Oregon, and the Marionberry is an Oregon berry. So this is kind of a cobbler in an ice cream form. It is fantastic. And the next one is a vanilla ice cream, a plain vanilla. This one features Terra and guar gum, so two galactomannans within the same ice cream. And we're going to talk a little bit about why it has found such good commercial success. Tillamook Dairy is not the only dairy that's been using it. The couple of large multinationals are also using it in their products, and there is a really good reason for its use within the ice cream industry. So I'm going to put up a table that hopefully takes everything that Ross talked about with TerraGum in relation to the other galactomannans and puts it all in one place. It's useful to understand the functionality of TerraGum to compare it to its brothers and sisters within the same family, that galactomannan family. So this table showcases the degree of substitution and how that affects the hydration characteristics and also pH stability. What you need to know is that we've got locust bean gum at a 4-to-1 substitution rate, and we have TerraGum at a 3-to-1 and guar gum at a 2-to-1. And what this means is, obviously, the galactose is what is water soluble. The mannose acts more like cellulose and is not water soluble. So the more galactose side chains, of course, the more soluble the product is. And Terra has that kind of magical right in the middle property. It's got a 3-to-1 substitution rate, which means that it has some cold water solubility, and it is more soluble certainly than locust bean gum, but not quite as soluble as guar gum. What this means for applications is, especially within ice cream, a lot of times you add ingredients not just for what they feel like in the mouth once the product is processed, but you're also adding for a little bit of functionality during processing. So TerraGum is quite useful if you're trying to suspend solids throughout the process for the ice cream mix. So say you've got a chocolate ice cream and you need a little bit of additional viscosity to that ice cream to actually keep the cocoa evenly suspended throughout the production run. And this is where TerraGum really shines. But it also has a very, very unique mouthfeel, and it does help ice crystal retardation. So it functions very similarly to locust bean gum, but it has a unique mouthfeel. And Ross will probably roll his eyes when he hears me saying this because it's not really a technical term, but the only way I can describe it is it's silkier. And I would challenge you to find a couple of different ice creams, one that only uses locust bean gum and guar, and one that uses TerraGum and guar, and compare the two. And I think that you'll be able to really pick them out in a lineup. That TerraGum is quite distinct in its mouthfeel. Let's delve a little bit further into what that galactose substitution actually is doing to the molecule. And I want you to think of one way to picture it is an egg crate, and each cup represents a sugar. And the egg crate is going to be that mannose back chain, and the galactose actually is going to be a little stick off of the bottom of that of the mannose back chain. So locust bean gum is 4-to-1, which kind of in generic terms, every 4 sugars should have an offshoot of galactose. This is not how nature works, however. You don't usually have perfect 4 sugars a galactose, 4 sugars a galactose, 4 sugars with the galactose. And for tarragum, it would be 3 sugars in a galactose, 3 sugars in a galactose. But this is not how nature works, ever. It's never so perfect. It's the blockiness of those galactose side chains that actually informs the function. So the more galactose, the less galactose that you have in a region, the more likely that egg crate is going to nest in other egg crates. So you've got perfect nesting. To rip that apart takes quite a bit of energy. And this is why it's more difficult to hydrate. You need hot water, got to generate some kinetic energy to pry the egg crate apart. But if you have interrupting galactose side chains, that egg crate can't nest properly, and this means that it doesn't take much at all, just physical force to actually get that egg crate to pop apart. And this is the difference between locust bean gum, tarragum, and guar gum. So guar gum has a very high degree of substitution, which means that it just doesn't nest with the other egg crates very, very solidly. So you can throw it into cold water, mix it up, and it goes into solution quite readily. Where tarragum, with its 1 to 3, there's a galactose side chain about every 3rd molecule of the mannose. And so it does have areas of nesting and large regions of just the mannose, okay? And the theory is that it's these mannose, unsubstituted mannose chains that interact with other molecules like xanthan gum, kappa carrageenan, or agar. This is where the synergism comes into play. And it also is the reason that it takes a little bit of heat to get this to hydrate properly. So it is a really lovely blend of hydration characteristics, more similar to guar, and functionality more similar to locust bean gum. So if you want to think about where you could potentially use tarragum, you can potentially use it anywhere you would use either one of these products. And it just is very successful in ice cream due to those hydration characteristics and those large areas of unsubstituted mannose that help with keeping ice crystal formation from happening when that ice cream is shocked. So I'm excited to be able to share some of the work that I have done in my own lab. And what I am going to do is put up this table that showcases what I've done. What we want to look at is the effect of the galactose side chain substitution on the finished texture and the synergism with xanthan gum. So I am taking, it's a 1% total gum. Half is xanthan gum and half is galactomannan, either locust bean gum, tarragum, or guar gum. And I am going to demonstrate a couple of key things here. I'm weighing them all out, and then I am going to hydrate these gums very carefully by using a tip that if you take nothing else from this video, take this little tip and trick. You want to disperse your gum as best you can. If you've got a customer that's having a problem or an issue with the hydrocolloid, chances are it's not the actual hydrocolloid, it is the hydration. Dispersion and hydration are 90% of the problems that people have with hydrocolloids. So I'm going to give you a rule of thumb. Use about 10 parts of sugar or salt or other ingredients to 1 part of your hydrocolloid, and do a nice dry blend. Get that all blended in really well. What you're trying to do is keep the hydrocolloid particles from being in contact with one another as they're hitting the water. And the reason for this is when they're together and they hit the water, they're going to stick together, and you're going to get what's called in the business fish eyes. And you want to avoid fish eyes as much as possible because those are more difficult. They take a lot of energy to break up. So in a, if you can picture this in a commercial setting, you've got a ginormous mix tank and a squirrel cage mixer in there that's not doing a really great job at moving things around. You're going to dump straight hydrocolloid into the water. It's just going to form a ginormous fisheye and it won't be functional in your product. What you want to do is dry blend it with all of your other dry ingredients and then add that to the big mix tank, and you should get it to disperse much better, especially if you find, if you use that 10-to-1 ratio. There is one thing that I would like to also talk about really quickly. I am using standard tap water in San Diego, which is quite hard, and it does have quite a bit of calcium in it. And I wanted to show this graph. This is 1% solution of TerraGum, and what happens when you're throwing it into different salt concentrations. It does lose a little bit of viscosity, but it's not nearly what some other hydrocolloids will do in salt. It's not super salt sensitive, which also makes it a great thing to work with.
Okay, I'm going to get started with the locust bean gum here. I'm pouring in the sugar and hydrocolloid blend here, and I am actually stirring with my non-dominant hand. So I'm not doing a fantastic job. You can see I switch over. I'm trying to make a vortex and pour in the hydrocolloids as I'm making that vortex and stirring by hand. There's not a ton of viscosity that I develop. You'll notice as I pour from the cup into the pan. There's some there, and that's provided by xanthan gum. And then take a look at how easy it is. There's not a lot of residual on the beaker afterwards. We're moving on to TerraGum. I'm trying to create the vortex with that spoonula and pour in the sugar blends into the vortex. I'm trying to get to the top and then let it stir in. And you can see that the vortex starts going away pretty quickly. This is because I'm actually having to stir really hard here because to keep that vortex going, I'm really struggling. And at this point, I realize that I'm going to have to use a submersion blender to actually get this to hydrate. You can see there's quite a few big fish eyes, and they're very, very obvious. And this is because TerraGum has some cold hydration properties. So you can see there's quite a bit more viscosity here and a lot of fish eyes. So I'm pouring this in. There is more viscosity there, and I'm having to scrape a little bit more off of the sides of that beaker because it actually is clinging to the beaker a little bit more than the locust bean gum was. We're moving on to guar gum. And you'll see I really struggle with this one. So I am trying to get that vortex going and pour the sugar mixture into the top of that vortex and stir it in. You can see the beaker's actually kind of starting to move even because I'm building so much viscosity. And again, I grab that stick blender. I've got to get the stick blender actually to get it into solution. So I'm really struggling hard. I am really having to stir really hard, and I've still got just a ton of fish eyes in there, and it's very obvious that I did not get that hydrated. So after the stick blender, you can see how viscous this stuff is, and that is because guar and xanthan both are cold soluble. All right, so I've cooked them up for 5 minutes at simmer each. And I poured into a mold. I'm demolding here and putting it out. So the locust bean gum, you can kind of see that texture. It's a nice elastic gel, quite firm. And I'm demolding the Terra at this point. And again, it's a really good, very, very nice elastic gel. And this is definitely showcasing the synergism of these hydrocolloids with xanthan gum. All right, so guar, with its degree of substitution, the galactomannan, it obviously does not form a gel. This is just a viscous solution, and that is it.
So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that you can take some of the lessons from it and actually apply it to some of your formulation work. I am going to share some formulations that I have done in the past. This first one is an ice cream, and this is one of the best applications for TerraGum. One of the things that you want to keep in mind if you're formulating ice cream is to balance the viscosity of your mix with the amount of overrun that you want to generate. So in a lot of cases, the thicker the mix is, the more difficult it is to incorporate a lot of air in there. So for gelato, maybe you can have a more thick mix, a more viscous mix, because you don't incorporate a lot of air into gelato. However, for ice cream, where you want about 100% overrun, you need to balance and have a bit lighter mix. This one is light, very light, and does have a pretty good record of good overrun. So I have about 0.08% TerraGum and a low viscosity guar gum at 0.12%. And we're going to go over a little bit of processing steps because, again, I really want to emphasize hydration and dispersion are absolutely key to working with cold soluble type of ingredients. So you're going to dry blend your sugar and all of your other dry ingredients. You're going to dry blend those together. You're going to wet blend your wet ingredients and have those in the mix tank. You're going to start warming them, and you're going to add your sugars and hydrocolloids in and get a good mix in. And you're going to want to start warming that, and of course the guar is going to go into solution pretty quickly. The Terra will go into solution as well as you start warming up, and the butterfat softens and just becomes more easy to process when you pre-warm. You're going to then process just like you would a regular ice cream mix. And so I am lucky, I have an ice cream machine with an external condenser on it, and I can actually make pretty good ice cream in about an hour, which is really lovely. But I do recommend resting your mix. I know that a lot of commercial products are rested overnight, and you can, if you rest overnight, and then I like to add my vanilla because I add quite a bit. I like a strong vanilla flavor right before freezing. This is generally how I would do this. So Dennis talked a little bit about what was happening with the price for TerraGum at the moment. It is being dragged upward along kind of on the tailcoats of locust bean gum. And this is because it is so successful as a locust bean gum replacement. One of the primary drivers for locust bean gum right now is the plant-based movement, where it is used throughout the plant-based milk industry as a mouthfeel enhancer. Well, TerraGum can also be used as a mouthfeel enhancer for plant-based milks. You would probably use less. I would use about 25% less in a chocolate milk or a plant-based milk than you would use locust bean gum because it has a little bit additional viscosity. And so this is kind of an important thing to note. Reduce the use level if you're going to replace locust bean gum. I did want to share a plant-based ice cream formulation. Now this is one that is based on soy protein isolate, but you can fiddle around with the different protein sources. There are a lot of protein sources that you can use these days. I recommend actually blending plant-based proteins. Pea protein has that kind of peppery note to it, and soy protein has a very strong beany flavor. But if you blend a couple of different protein sources, you'll get a cleaner overall flavor. They kind of end up balancing each other out. So there's a good hint for working with some of these plant-based proteins. Try and blend your protein source if you can. This one also contains quite a bit of emulsifier. I've used SSLs, I've used monoglycerides and polysorbate 80. So getting the melt right for a fat that may or may not be melting at mouth temperature, That is a little bit of a trick. So I have a couple of different emulsifiers in here. I call it cheating a little bit, and I have definitely cheated a little bit. So this one contains tarragon and guar gum as well. And then my best tip for working with plant-based proteins for flavor is to simply mask it. So this is a chocolate. I hope you enjoy. This one you would be preparing very similar to a dairy milk type of product. You want to, of course, blend your dry ingredients, and you're going to melt in your emulsifiers with the fat, and then you're going to add those to the water along with the dry ingredients and blend really well. You're going to heat that, homogenize it, and process it just like you would a regular ice cream. This one turns out pretty good, and I hope that you enjoy it. If you have a chance to make it up, let me know how you like it. The next formulation that I want to share is a chocolate milk formulation. I mentioned that locust bean gum is used pretty predominantly throughout the plant-based industry, especially within the milks. And so I'm just going to share a simple chocolate milk formula. This is a 2% milk fat, and some tarragon gum and carrageenan or high acyl gellan gum. It does provide some really nice mouthfeel. This is going to give more of a drinking chocolate type of texture. It's a little on the thicker side, and it's very, very rich. You would process this again by dry blending all of your dries, and you're going to blend your wet ingredients together, add your wets to your dry while you're stirring it, and then you're going to homogenize, pasteurize, and pack off. So we've covered a lot of dairy applications, and I wanted to maybe talk about some of the other areas where tarragon can be used. One of the most successful areas is bakery applications. Now this would be more for in-store bakery, where the store would bake up a product like a cake, and then the consumer would buy it, and it might sit on the shelf in the grocery store for a day or two. The consumer, might sit on their shelf for a day or two prior to consumption. In order to maintain the quality of that good throughout its shelf life, you add a little bit of guar gum or tarragon gum to maintain the moisture content throughout its shelf life. Another area is because of its synergism with other hydrocolloids, it can be blended with carrageenan, and is very successfully used in meat applications where carrageenan is used. So sliceable deli meats, sausages, it can be used in those applications as well. I wanted to share a final recipe with you. This is for a local San Diego delicacy, and this is a white sauce with jalapenos. And I really hope that you enjoy this one. This is served in a couple of my favorite restaurants here. And it has some jalapenos that you can add or reduce based on your flavor preferences. And what you want to do is, this is another tip for working with cold soluble hydrocolloids. You want to blend the dry products with the fat. So if you are using sugar, it's a 10-to-1 ratio for a dry product. But if you have oil available and can disperse your hydrocolloid in oil, you only have to use a 5-to-1 dispersion rate. So this is another trick for working with cold soluble hydrocolloids that I hope that you will remember. So blend all of your dry ingredients into the butter, and then add that and warm it up. You want to heat this to boiling, and you're going to stir it the whole time. Once you hit that temperature, you're going to slowly add in your cheeses and melt them in. And this is actually designed to be either consumed immediately, or you can freeze it and serve it at a future time. Serve it with tortilla chips, and like I said, you can add as much jalapeno or as little as you want. I hope that you have found this training module useful. We would love to hear from you. You can visit us at www.hydrocolloid.com. Our email addresses are there, and we would actually really love to hear from you. And please, if you have a chance to make up any of these formulations, I'd love to hear from you as well.